What happens when a straight-A student is thrown out of school just for being pregnant by the very principal meant to protect her future? Emma had her cap, her gown, and a plan. What she pulled off on graduation day left the whole town speechless. Emma Clark's fingers trembled as she zipped up the navy blue graduation gown that had hung on her closet door for months, taunting her with a future she nearly lost. The fabric rustled softly, whispering of everything it once promised. A clean walk across the gymnasium stage, applause echoing through the bleachers, her parents beaming in the front row, and a diploma placed proudly in her hands by the very man who would later strip her of it. But instead, that same gym would be packed with whispers about her belly and the baby growing inside it, eyes darting from her stomach to the stage as if her very presence were some kind of contamination. Just 6 months earlier, she had been the pride of East Ridge High, valedictorian in waiting, student council president, scholarship finalist, and the only girl in town who could quote Maya Angelou and dismantle a robotics panel in the same afternoon. Teachers adored her. Parents pointed her out at open houses, and colleges had already begun circling her like hawks with scholarship offers in hand. She had notebooks filled with essays and recommendation letters that spoke of promise and potential, of a young woman who would go on to change the world. But when the pregnancy test turned positive one icy morning in December, everything shifted in an instant. She sat on the edge of the bathtub, the test shaking in her hand, the second pink line blaring back at her like an alarm she couldn't shut off. Her first thought wasn't fear, it was denial. Maybe it was a mistake, maybe she'd misread it, maybe the universe was giving her one last cruel joke before finals. But the second, the third, the fourth test all confirmed what her gut already knew. She was pregnant, she was 17, and she was alone. At first, she thought she could handle it, raise the baby, graduate, get into Columbia. She'd drawn out timelines, mapped out study schedules around morning sickness, practiced how she'd break the news to her mother without making her cry. She'd even planned a name, Lily, if it was a girl, after her great-grandmother who used to sing to her in Yiddish lullabies and braid her hair with stories. But that hopeful framework shattered the moment she sat across from Principal Holloway, a man she once saw as a mentor, a guiding light, someone who'd written one of her earliest letters of recommendation with the phrase "born leader" underlined. He hadn't looked her in the eyes when he handed over the letter, just kept shifting the papers on his desk like they might rearrange the reality he was enforcing. "This school," he said, voice clipped and formal, "has an image to maintain." His office had always smelled of old books and lemon polish. Comforting once, now suffocating. No discussion, no hearing, no second chance. Just a signed expulsion form, a sealed fate, and the crushing realization that the institution that once celebrated her had turned its back when she needed it most. Emma walked out of his office without saying a word, the document folded in her trembling hands, her backpack suddenly heavier than it had ever felt. She'd gone home that day and locked herself in the bathroom, staring into the mirror until the sun went down and her reflection blurred with tears. Her mother, Lorraine, knocked softly, once, twice, then leaned her head against the door, whispering, "Emma, baby, we'll figure this out." Her voice laced with worry and warmth, but also a fear that Emma could hear even through the wood. But Emma didn't believe it, not then. The shame, the fear, the betrayal, it felt permanent, like something etched into her skin. That night, she folded her sash, her cords, even the speech she'd written for the valedictorian podium, full of hope and poetic flair, and stuffed them into a shoebox under her bed, the lid snapping shut like the end of a chapter she hadn't finished. She curled up beside it, pressing a hand to her stomach, and wondered what her baby would think of her someday. Would Lily be proud? Ashamed? Would she understand? But the anger didn't stay buried for long. It began as a whisper, a flicker, then grew louder with each passing week. Every time she passed the school gates, saw her classmates preparing for prom in sequined gowns and rented limos, or watched Principal Holloway smile in yearbook photos and local newsletters like he hadn't quietly erased her from their shared history, it burned hotter. The injustice of it, the cowardice, the hypocrisy, it lit something in her that the shame couldn't smother. And somewhere between buying prenatal vitamins at the corner pharmacy and teaching herself calculus from borrowed textbooks in the middle of the night while Lily kicked against her ribs, Emma began crafting a plan, one quiet, strategic move at a time. She wasn't looking for vengeance, not really. She wasn't trying to make anyone pay. She just wanted to be heard, to be seen, to be understood. She wanted to remind everyone who had erased her that she had never left, that her story didn't end in shame. It began there. And as her belly grew rounder, her steps slower, and her due date nearer, so too did the blueprint for her return. It was patient, methodical, and rooted in the belief that silence had never saved anyone like her. The time for silence was over. She didn't tell anyone, not her mom, not even Madison, her best friend since kindergarten, who had offered to sneak her notes and recorded lectures. Madison had texted almost every day during those first few weeks, offering to FaceTime during study session, to leave biology worksheets taped to the back fence, to just come over and sit beside her in silence if that's what she needed. But Emma couldn't bring herself to respond. Not yet. She didn't want comfort or pity. She wanted clarity, strategy, something solid to stand on in the midst of a life that had cracked like ice beneath her feet. Instead of replying, she poured herself into research like a woman possessed. She watched every school board meeting on public access TV, even the grainy archived ones from 3 years ago, writing down names, timestamps, policies. She read through the student handbook not once, not twice, but 3 times, highlighting inconsistencies, underlining vague clauses, scribbling notes in the margins like she was preparing for trial. At the free legal clinic downtown, she sat across from 2 different lawyers, each time with her binder of evidence in hand, voice steady despite the nausea that never quite left her. She recited the facts with practiced calm even when one of the lawyers, a tired man in a wrinkled suit, sighed and said, "You're remarkably prepared for someone your age." What she discovered wasn't just empowering, it was infuriating. Her expulsion had no legal merit. The school had no written policy against pregnant students. In fact, a federal law, Title IX, explicitly protected her right to continue her education without penalty, without shame. Principal Holloway had gambled that she wouldn't know her rights, that she'd crumble quietly, maybe even drop out without a fuss. He had assumed that a pregnant teenager wouldn't have the energy, the resources, or the courage to fight back. He was wrong. Emma began documenting everything. She compiled texts from her teachers, some expressing sympathy, some ominously silent. She saved emails, screenshots of attendance records, proof of her academic standing, and even voice memos she recorded alone in her room, recalling conversations with word-for-word accuracy. Every time she felt too tired to keep going, she reminded herself that this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the next girl. The girl after that. The ones who would walk into Principal Holloway's office and be handed the same quiet exile if nothing changed. She started building a video, a digital patchwork of her story, facts, legal references, and an open message to the graduating class who had no idea what had happened behind the closed doors of the administration. She filmed it at night, after her mom went to sleep, sitting on her bed with a makeshift tripod made from textbooks and rubber bands. The lighting wasn't perfect. Her hair was tied back in a messy bun. She didn't wear makeup, didn't bother editing out the moments when she paused to breathe or wipe her eyes. But the words came out clear. Her voice cracked, but it never wavered. "If I have to be invisible to graduate," she said into the lens, staring down the barrel of the camera with the steadiness of someone who had nothing left to lose, "then I'll be loud for every girl who comes after me." She talked about how the school had praised her when she was an asset to their image, when she stood on stage with medals clinking and the Eastridge logo proudly embroidered behind her. But the moment her life complicated their narrative, they erased her like a typo in a press release. She didn't scream. She didn't curse. She simply told the truth, frame by frame, layered with screenshots, scanned documents, and clips from the very board meetings that had turned their backs on her. She wove in statistics about teen pregnancy and dropout rates, juxtaposed with photos from her robotics competitions and student council events. She ended it with a single line in black text on a white screen. "We don't vanish, we rise." By the time graduation week arrived, the video was scheduled, encrypted, and ready to upload across every major platform with the click of a button. She'd built a digital time-release bomb of truth, timed for maximum exposure. She had one last piece of the puzzle left to secure, one thing her heart ached for and her spine demanded. A stage, not a virtual one, not a soapbox in her bedroom or a comment thread or a private email. A real stage, the one they took from her. the one she'd earned. She didn't need to take the podium, she just needed to stand there, to be seen, to make sure no one could look away. Because if they were going to remember the class of 2024, they'd remember the girl they tried to forget. Graduation day dawned bright and breathless. The sun spilled over East Ridge High like it did in the brochures, all polished brass and manicured lawns, the banners flapping crisply in the breeze, congratulating the class of 2024 in blocky gold letters that shimmered like they meant something. The gymnasium had been transformed, the hard bleachers dressed with white bunting, and the stage decorated with pots of yellow chrysanthemums that smelled like too much effort and not enough sincerity. Students lined up in alphabetical order in the hallway, robes pressed, smiles nervous and excited, tassels bouncing as they chatted about summer plans and dorm assignments, eyes darting around in search of parents and cameras and moments to lock into memory. Emma wasn't among them. She was across the street, in the church parking lot, adjusting the hem of her gown and rubbing her belly as Lily kicked twice, almost like a signal, like her daughter could feel the electricity rising in her mother's bones. She stood between two minivans with her back to the stained glass windows and the weight of decision pressing down on her spine. Lorraine had begged her not to do it. "You don't need to prove anything, Emma," she'd pleaded that morning, standing in the doorway in her faded cardigan, voice thick with worry and love, eyes rimmed red from a sleepless night spent pacing and praying. But Emma had looked her in the eye and said, "I'm not doing it for me." And she wasn't. She was doing it for the girls sitting in the bleachers, for the teachers who had silently watched her be erased, for the future her daughter would grow up in, one she hoped might be a little less cruel. Madison met her by the side entrance with a borrowed staff badge and a lanyard from her older sister who'd graduated 2 years earlier, her hands shaking as she passed them over like contraband, eyes scanning for hall monitors like they were planning a heist. "You sure about this?" Madison asked, voice barely above a whisper. Emma nodded once, jaw set. No one questioned her as she slipped in, walking with the calm defiance of someone who had nothing left to lose and everything left to say. The scent of polished gym floors hit her like nostalgia gone sour. She kept her head down, cap tilted low, robe unzipped just enough to let her breathe. From behind the curtain she could hear names being called. The principal's voice smooth and practiced, each diploma handed out with a handshake and a photo op. The audience clapped mechanically, programmed applause between camera flashes. The plan was simple. Wait until the final names were called, when the audience was loud and distracted, then walk directly onto the stage during the principal's closing remarks. But simplicity didn't make it easy. Her heart pounded so hard it drowned out her thoughts. She gripped the edge of the curtain like a lifeline, willing herself not to flinch. "This school values integrity, excellence, and tradition," Principal Holloway declared from the podium, chin raised high, cadence measured like a man who'd practiced the speech in front of a mirror. "We are proud to send these young adults into the world as ambassadors of—" He trailed off, eyes locking on Emma as she stepped onto the stage from the wings, cap low over her brow, gown unmistakable, the gold sash draped over her shoulders like a reclaimed crown. The gym fell silent, not a cough or whisper or breath out of place, as if time itself had paused in collective disbelief. The tension was immediate, a ripple of confusion that tightened into shock as more faces turned toward her, cameras instinctively lifting, mouths parting in recognition. A few teachers stood instinctively, unsure whether to stop her or shield her. Madison held her breath in the third row, white-knuckled around the edge of her seat. Lorraine, seated near the back, pressed both hands to her chest, eyes wide with fear and pride and something deeper, hope. Emma didn't hesitate. She walked to the microphone with the calm of someone who had already faced her worst fears and survived them. The tap of her flats against the hardwood echoed like punctuation, each step a sentence in the story no one wanted to hear, but everyone needed to. Principal Holloway's mouth moved, but no sound came. He was stunned, unprepared for a girl he thought he'd buried to rise in front of the very crowd he used to crown himself king. Emma took her place at the podium, spine straight, eyes forward, her hand brushing the mic with purpose as if saying, "This is mine now." And in that moment, it was. The microphone feedback cracked as she gently moved him aside, lifting the mic with a steady hand. The faint screech slicing through the stunned silence like a warning shot before a battle cry. "My name is Emma Clark," she said, her voice clear, her words slicing through the thick, uneasy air of the gymnasium. "And I was your valedictorian, until I became pregnant." The audience froze. Gasps rippled through the crowd like a wave snapping against the shore, a swell of disbelief and realization crashing through rows of parents, students, and teachers alike. Even the row of school board members seated in the front looked up from their neatly folded programs, blinking in stunned disbelief. "I was expelled illegally, without a hearing, without cause, by the very man who stands beside me," Emma continued, calm, resolute, her gaze burning straight ahead as she gestured to Principal Holloway, whose face had gone several shades lighter, his forced smile melting off his face like wax in a heat wave. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The stillness of her tone gave the words more power than shouting ever could. "But I didn't come here for pity," she said, lifting her chin just slightly, her fingers gripping the edge of the podium with quiet strength. "I came here with the truth." From the inner pocket of her gown, she pulled out a flash drive, small, silver, nondescript, and handed it to the AV tech crouched behind the curtain, who looked between her and Holloway for guidance before silently plugging it in, perhaps sensing the gravity of the moment or simply refusing to be another cog in a broken system. Within seconds, the projector screen behind Emma flickered to life, and the opening frame of her video glowed across the gym wall, a slideshow of her awards, her straight-A report cards, her robotics trophies, a photo of her shaking hands with the mayor during a youth leadership conference, and then a black screen with white text, "What they don't want you to see." The video transitioned into a candid, vulnerable confessional, a collage of dates, scanned documents, screenshots of her expulsion letter, voice memos recounting her meetings, even clips from the school board's own policy statements. Parents began murmuring, some shifting uncomfortably in their seats, others craning their necks toward the screen, squinting in disbelief. Students pulled out their phones, some recording, others texting frantically. Teachers stared, a few with mouths slightly open, others with furrowed brows. Those who had once praised her, now forced to reckon with their silence. Emma turned back to the mic, her expression steady but not hardened. "Being pregnant didn't make me less capable," she said, one hand resting on the gentle curve of her belly. "It didn't make me less worthy, but punishing me for it, silencing me, makes this school less honorable." Her words echoed off the gym walls, off the lacquered bleachers and polished floors, off the collective guilt and complicity hanging in the air. For a beat, there was only silence, thick, weighty, unbearable. Then, someone in the crowd stood up and clapped, a single, sharp sound that cracked the tension like glass. Then another, and another. The applause grew, not polite, not hesitant, but wild and rising, a cathartic flood of recognition and release. Madison was crying in the third row, both hands clasped over her mouth, shoulders shaking with sobs. Lorraine, standing near the back, had her hand over her mouth too, eyes glassy with tears that trembled in the corners, the ache and pride of a mother watching her daughter do what most adults never could. Principal Holloway reached toward the AV tech, voice sharp and low, trying to cut the feed, regain control, claw back the narrative he had so carefully managed. But the tech didn't move. He stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, letting the video roll. The gym lights flickered once, as if struggling to keep up with the electricity surging through the room. The video played through, Emma reading federal education policy aloud, showing Title IX protections in simple, bold text, cutting to footage of other girls who had dropped out in silence, who had vanished into the margin. "This is not just my story," her voice narrated over images of her belly, her textbooks, her empty locker. "It's the story of every girl who's been told to disappear." The final screen went black. Then white text faded in. "We are not your shame. We are your future." The projector shut off and the gym was silent again. But this time it wasn't shocked silence. It was reverence. Emma didn't cry. She didn't flinch. She just stood there, her hands protectively over her belly, chin high, shoulders square, as the town she grew up in saw her not as a scandal, but as a symbol, a mirror, a reckoning. She had walked onto that stage a girl discarded, forgotten, erased, and stood her ground as a woman unwilling to be ignored, her voice now echoing louder than any speech Principal Holloway had prepared, a legacy she had written herself in front of everyone who once doubted her. The fallout was swift. Within 24 hours, the video had racked up over 2 million views on YouTube, circulating like wildfire through school districts, parenting forums, and social justice channels, shared with captions like, "This girl is braver than our entire school board," and "Watch until the end. She destroys her principal with fact." Comments poured in from across the country, some from girls who had faced the same silent punishment, others from parents who realized with quiet horror that their children's schools might have done the same thing. By the end of the week, national outlets had picked up the story. The headline, "Pregnant Valedictorian Expelled, Fights Back on Graduation Day," appeared on news tickers beneath suited anchors who shook their heads and said, "Unbelievable," while smiling just enough for the camera. Daytime talk shows invited Emma to speak. Podcast hosts dissected her speech word for word. Editorials debated what her story meant for the future of public education. But Emma stayed quiet for a few days, overwhelmed and raw, watching the views tick upward while Lily napped beside her in the bassinet, tiny hands curled into fists that reminded Emma of how fiercely she had fought to stand on that stage. Hashtags trended, "I can't let her speak," "Are Emma stands," "Title Likes Hero." Celebrities retweeted her video with praise. A civil rights group offered to represent her pro bono, their email subject line reading, "You made history. Let us help you protect it." Emma read it twice before forwarding it to Lorraine, hands shaking. The school board, cornered by public outrage and local embarrassment, called an emergency meeting that Friday night. For the first time, parents showed up in droves, standing room only. They brought printouts of her speech, demanded policy reviews, asked questions that had been silenced for too long. Some shouted, some cried. One mother clutched the hand of her teenage daughter, looked the board dead in the eye and said, "If you had done this to her, I would have burned this place to the ground." And the superintendent, a man whose name Emma had never cared to remember, resigned quietly 2 weeks later with a single-sentence statement citing personal reasons. Principal Holloway was placed on administrative leave pending investigation, and though Emma didn't take joy in his suspension, he had a family after all, a wife, and a young son she once saw in the grocery store aisle picking out cereal. She couldn't deny the satisfaction that bloomed in her chest when she heard the words "public apology," because for once, the burden of shame had shifted back to the shoulders that deserved to carry it. Columbia reached out with a deferred admission offer, along with an apologetic note from the admissions officer who had once silently removed her application from review. "We stand corrected," it read. Emma cried quietly in the kitchen when she opened that envelope, the baby monitor humming beside her as Lily slept in the next room. She hadn't expected the world to notice, certainly not to rally. But the community, it changed. Not all at once, but like frost thawing after a long, bitter winter. Parents started asking harder questions at PTA meetings. Students began whispering less and listening more. A quiet girl named Janelle, who used to eat lunch alone near the vending machines, wore a "Let Her Speak" shirt to summer school orientation, and when a teacher asked if it was disruptive, half the class stood up and said they had extras in their backpacks. Lorraine started getting phone calls from other mothers, some asking for advice, some offering casseroles, all of them acknowledging what they hadn't before. Emma didn't see herself as a hero. She still had morning sickness some mornings so bad she couldn't sit up straight. She had bills that arrived with cold efficiency and college applications to navigate with a baby in tow. Her laptop screen often smudged with fingerprints from Lily's curious hands. But she felt less alone now. She felt, finally, visible. The town that once whispered behind her back now held bake sales for teen moms, started a diaper drive at the library, and added a student parent support tab to the school website. Her old chemistry teacher sent a note through Madison that simply read, "We failed you. You didn't fail us." Emma kept it pinned above her desk, right next to Lily's first sonogram photo, as a reminder that not all apologies come in speeches or press releases. Sometimes they come in quiet acknowledgments, in small handwritten truths that matter more than the headlines ever could. Emma moved into a small apartment above the bookstore downtown, with chipped paint and creaky stairs and a landlord who left welcome cookies on the windowsill, wrapped in plastic with a note that simply said, "You're doing great." The place smelled like old pages and floor wax, and the walls were thin enough that she could hear the hum of the espresso machine downstairs every morning before her alarm went off, but it was hers. It wasn't much, just a kitchenette with mismatched cupboards, a bathroom with a cracked mirror, and one bedroom that barely fit the crib and her narrow twin mattress, but it was enough. Her mom came by every Thursday with groceries, paper bags full of apples, oatmeal, baby formula, and sometimes little treats like chocolate-covered almonds or lavender-scented soap. She always knocked twice and let herself in with the spare key, moving around the apartment with quiet hands, putting things away, tidying corners, leaving behind folded laundry and warm encouragement in the form of post-it notes on the fridge. Don't forget to breathe. You are not your worst day. Lily is lucky to have you. Madison visited too, usually on Saturdays, lugging in paint samples and swatches she collected from hardware stores, dreaming out loud about accent walls and peel-and-stick wallpaper with gold stars. "This could be Lily's little galaxy," she said once, holding up a pale purple swatch, her eyes bright with possibility. Emma nodded, grateful for the fantasy, even if she didn't always have the energy to participate. She took online classes at first, enrolling in 2 community college courses, English Lit and Intro to Sociology, because they fit into her schedule and didn't require her to commute. She'd log in late at night, Lily curled up on her chest in a fleece onesie that smelled like baby shampoo, her tiny breaths rising and falling in sync with Emma's own. Some nights, Emma typed essays one-handed while bouncing Lily with the other. She missed deadline. She cried over feedback that felt harsher than it should have. She battled the fog of sleep deprivation and the ache of isolation that clung to her like damp wool. It was harder than she'd imagined, lonelier too. There were nights when the apartment felt like a cave, the silence echoing back every self-doubt she'd ever swallowed. She wondered if the speech had been worth it, if the video had changed anything beyond a headline and a few bake sale. She wondered if people still talked about her, or if they had already moved on, letting her moment dissolve into internet noise. But every time she looked at Lily, her round cheeks, her little fists flailing in dreams, the way her eyes searched for Emma's face as soon as she stirred, she knew she'd made the right choice. "You saved me," she whispered once, in the blue light of dawn, rocking her back to sleep as the city yawned awake outside the window. The words weren't just a sentiment, they were a truth she felt in her bone. Lily had been the reason Emma fought, the reason she stood on that stage, the reason she kept showing up to a life that demanded more than it gave back. One afternoon, while reorganizing a drawer stuffed with bills and baby socks, she found the old shoebox beneath her bed, the one with the cords and valedictorian speech, the yellowing edges of the note cards curling slightly like they were trying to hug themselves shut. She opened it slowly, careful not to tear the paper that had once meant so much. The speech was there, folded neatly, written in blue ink with little hearts dotting the eyes, like she'd still been half a kid when she wrote it. She read it aloud in a whisper, her voice catching on certain lines, the parts where she thanked the teachers who believed in her, the ones who had looked away when she was expelled. The parts where she spoke about resilience, not yet knowing how much she'd need it. It still made her cry, not because of what she lost, but because of what she became. The speech wasn't a relic anymore, it was a mirror, and for the first time she didn't feel like she had to hide it. Over time, the whispers faded, the stares disappeared. They didn't vanish all at once, more like they eroded slowly, washed away by the quiet, persistent tide of Emma simply continuing to live her life in full view. She became a tutor at the community center just off Maple Street, where the smell of old chalkboards and microwaved coffee lingered in the halls like permanent background noise. Her job wasn't glamorous, 20 hours a week, minimum wage, with more lesson plans than pencils and too many students juggling full-time jobs or motherhood or both, but it gave her purpose. She helped young women who looked at her the same way she had once looked at other girls with babies, like a question mark wearing lipstick. She worked with teens balancing diapers and dream, girls who had been told to give up or stay small, and she sat beside them with flashcards, broken calculators, and long talks about polynomial equations and the realities of daycare waitlists. When they struggled, she reminded them gently, it's not about being perfect, it's about not quitting. And when she told her story at assemblies and youth conferences, sometimes in auditoriums that smelled like anxiety and cafeteria pizza, she always ended with the same line. Your worth is not determined by what happens to you, but by how you rise after it. It became something of a signature, quoted in thank you cards from students and scribbled in gel pen on notebooks. She never got used to being seen as a role model, but she learned to accept it with humility. Lily, meanwhile, grew into a wild, curious toddler with Emma's eyes and a laugh that could melt walls. She loved to twirl in mismatched socks, ask too many questions, and smear peanut butter on everything she could reach. At the bookstore below their apartment, patrons would smile and ask, "Is this the famous Lily?" Emma would grin and nod, tucking a curl behind Lily's ear, which was always warm and soft and smelled like apple shampoo. "She's even better than the story," Emma would say, and she meant it. Every day, Lily reminded her that life wasn't about reclaiming what was lost. It was about making something new with what was left. The bookstore owner, a kind-eyed man named Paul, often let Lily shelve board books or sit on the counter and babble about dragons and dancing stars. Emma would watch from the doorway, heart swollen, remembering the night she used to rock that same little girl to sleep, whispering promises into the dark. One spring evening, as cherry blossoms bloomed along the sidewalk and the air was thick with the sweetness of new beginnings, Emma stood outside East Ridge High again, this time with no fear in her chest, no tremble in her spine. She wasn't hiding behind car doors or clutching flash drives like Lifeline. She was wearing jeans and a soft pink sweater, Lily perched on her hip, fingers sticky from a popsicle. She watched another class graduate from behind the fence, clapping for kids she didn't know, their gowns rippling in the breeze like banners of survival. She didn't need to be on stage anymore. She didn't need a mic or a spotlight. She was whole without them. As the music played and the crowd roared, she spotted Principal Holloway's replacement, a younger woman with a quiet strength, the kind you don't recognize until it's been tested. She had short-cropped hair, dark glasses, and a posture that said she had heard hard things and chosen to stay anyway. The woman caught Emma's eye from the podium and gave her a nod. Small, respectful, knowing. Emma nodded back. Progress, she thought. Not perfect, not finished, but real. Real progress. The kind that doesn't announce itself with fanfare but plants itself in moments like these, blooming slow and certain like the cherry trees that line the school gates, petals falling like confetti on kids who still had everything ahead of them. Emma kissed Lily's cheek, turned toward home, and let the past stay behind her, tender, weathered, but no longer heavy. That summer, Emma finally published the video as a memoir essay titled "The Day I Took the Mic Back." She had worked on it for weeks during Lily's naps, editing between spilled juice cups and frozen macaroni dinners, polishing each sentence like a stone she wanted to leave behind in someone else's pocket. It was more than a transcript. It was a reflection, a reckoning, a reclamation of everything she hadn't said on stage that day. The essay detailed the fear she had felt leading up to that moment, the way her hands shook beneath her gown, the sound of her own voice echoing louder than her heartbeat. She wrote about the shoebox under her bed, about the silence that followed her expulsion, about the strange and beautiful way shame could turn into something defiant if you carried it long enough. It circulated across college campuses first, shared by professors who printed it out for their students, high school teachers who added it to lesson plans about resilience and voice and standing tall in the face of systems meant to keep you small. A few even added it to their syllabi under sections titled Modern Resistant or Contemporary Memoirs. A student journalist from a liberal arts college emailed Emma for an interview, ending with the line, "Your story made me want to speak louder." The small grant she received from a women's rights foundation was unexpected, just enough to cover a new laptop, a semester's tuition, and a babysitter for 3 mornings a week. But to Emma, it felt like winning the lottery. It wasn't just about the money. It was about recognition. It was about being seen not as a cautionary tale, but as a blueprint for something better. Still, she faced setbacks. There were missed daycare pickups when buses ran late or professors went overtime. There were flat tires on rainy mornings when she had interviews to get to and no umbrella to shield Lily from the downpour. There were late-night fevers that left her pacing with a thermometer in one hand and a cold rag in the other, whispering lullabies over and over until her voice was hoarse. But she had support now. Madison, who babysat when she could and left notes on Emma's desk like, "You're already enough." Her mom, who kept her fridge stocked with frozen casseroles and called every Sunday without fail just to say, "I'm proud of you, kid." Even Paul from the bookstore, who gave her a discount on used textbooks and let Lily help stack shelves while Emma typed in the corner. Community, voice. Things that once felt like luxuries now felt like armor. One evening, after a long week of papers and pediatrician visits, she sat with Lily under a blanket fort built from old sheets and textbooks, fairy lights strung through clothespins to create a twinkling world of their own. Lily was in her pajamas, a chocolate smear on her cheek. Her small body curled into Emma's lap like she still belonged there completely. "Tell me a story," Lily asked, her voice sleep-drenched, hopeful. Emma smiled, tracing the tiny curve of her daughter's nose, feeling the soft warmth of a child who didn't know yet how brave her mother had had to be. "Okay," she said, brushing a loose curl behind Lily's ear. "Once, there was a girl who wanted to graduate more than anything. She studied hard, worked late, and dreamed in cap and gown colors. But then something happened, something unfair, and she didn't get to walk across the stage like she'd planned." Lily's brow furrowed, already invested. "So what did she do?" she asked. Emma leaned in closer, her voice soft and steady. "She decided to rewrite the ending. She stood up and spoke her truth, even when people tried to silence her. She made them listen, not with yelling, but with her heart. And even though she didn't win in the way she expected, she changed the rules." Lily giggled, reaching up to tap Emma's chin. "Did she win?" she asked again, eyes shining with the stubborn curiosity only a 4-year-old could carry. Emma kissed her forehead, pressing her lips gently against the place where everything good in her life began. "She didn't win," she said quietly. "She changed the rules, and for Emma, that had always been the bigger victory. In a town like East Ridge, stories were currency. They passed between people like folded notes in the halls of the high school, tucked into church bulletins, whispered in grocery store checkout lines, etched into bake sale flyers and community Facebook posts, and Emma Clark's story had become legend. Not because she was perfect or fearless or always knew what she was doing, but because she chose to speak when she was told to disappear, because she stood in front of a crowd with swollen ankles, a borrowed cap, and a fire in her voice that refused to dim. It wasn't just the speech that turned heads or the video that went viral. It was the way she didn't flinch, the way she didn't let shame or silence define her, the way she turned what was meant to be a footnote into a headline, a cautionary tale into a call to action. Every time someone mentioned her name, it came with a pause, a kind of reverence, like the breath people take before saying something sacred, as if people finally understood what courage could look like in a girl with a swollen belly, a GPA above 4, 0, and a plan that refused to die quietly. At the farmer's market, someone would point her out, low-voiced and wide-eyed. "That's her. That's Emma Clark." At city council meetings, her name would come up when people talked about revising outdated school policy. At the community center, girls would whisper about her during breaks, wondering if she'd tutor them, if she'd tell them how she did it. The myth and the girl blurred, but Emma stayed grounded in the mundane reality of it all. The diapers that needed changing at 3 a.m., the papers that were due by midnight, the milk that always seemed to run out right when Lily had a fever. Because long after the video stopped trending, after the interviews ended and the headlines moved on to newer, flashier scandals, the real story continued. Quiet, persistent, full of burp cloths and budget spreadsheets, kisses and college credits. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't filtered or choreographed for likes. It was real. And somehow, that made it matter more. Emma woke up some mornings still doubting herself, still wondering if she was enough, if she was doing right by Lily, if she had made the best choices with the tools she had. But when she walked across the street holding Lily's hand and someone honked in support, when a teacher emailed her for permission to share her essay with their class, when a stranger in a waiting room leaned over and said, "You helped my niece believe in herself," Emma knew the ripples were still moving outward. She'd built something, not just a life, not just a home, but a legacy stitched together from defiance, resilience, and an unshakable belief in her own voice. And though Emma never did walk the stage as valedictorian, never got to hear her name called beneath the echo of gymnasium rafters, never shook the principal's hand with cameras flashing and tassels turning, she walked into every room after that with her head held high, carrying the weight of what she'd survived like armor, wearing the truth like a second skin. She didn't need a diploma handed to her in front of applause to know what she was worth. She had already earned something bigger than a title. She had earned the right to take up space, to change the conversation, to crack open a door for every girl who came after her. And that, she realized, standing in line at the pharmacy, or at the edge of a playground, or behind a podium at yet another small-town gathering, was the kind of graduation no one could take away. Not a board, not a policy, not even the passing of time. It lived in her spine, in her daughter's laughter, in every girl who said "me too" and decided she didn't have to leave school or shrink herself or vanish in order to matter. Emma hadn't just reclaimed her voice, she had multiplied it. And in East Ridge, where stories were as valuable as land or last names, hers had become the one that made people sit up straighter, listen harder, and believe again.